Surviving Mars is the latest surviving/city building game from Hymenot Studios, which created the Tropico 3, 4, and 5 games. This game shares a lot more with Banished than it does, say, Tropico, for example. It's much more of a surviving game. Your goal is to try and manage resources and production to try and make sure that your people get the food and materials they need so that you don't just collapse as a society on Mars. You start the game by picking a patron country or organization that basically supports your operation, like, say, the USA, for example, who gives you more funding. This does a lot to your difficulty in a lot of ways because it changes how much funding you get, how much research you get, how much the cost of rare materials are when you ship them back to Earth, how many applicants there are, and it gives you certain benefits as well. Like, for example, if you pick the most basic one, your colonists never get Earth sick, which means that they don't just leave. You also get a larger rocket payload, so you can send more things down through rockets. And then you select a commander profile, which gives you certain bonuses like getting tech like water reclamation or arcology earlier, or additional bonuses towards research and so forth. And then you pick a logo, and there's a pretty decent variety of logos to choose from, but you won't really ever see it that much in the game, so it's kind of irrelevant for the most part. And then you get to choose a mystery, which is more or less a story event that plays alongside of your game. You won't really see much of these until the mid to late stages of the game, so it's mostly irrelevant at the beginning, but it does help to add a lot of variety to each playthrough of the game. I really do have to say, though, that you're probably best off turning the mysteries down a little bit when you first start to play, because there are some that can really ruin a playthrough. So if you play on random and you just start the game off, you might just get completely fucked over at the beginning of the game by something ridiculous that ruins your entire playthrough. And then finally you get to choose a landing site, which does have pretty big impacts on how difficult your playthrough will be. It determines things like how much water or resources you'll have accessible, and so forth. What makes Surviving Mars so different than a lot of other survival city building games is that it combines a lot more RTS gameplay with your more traditional city building management game. So for example, you have rovers that you can control, like the transport rover to move resources from one stockpile to another, or to grab resources on the map and bring them back to your town. You've got an RC explorer that can go out there and explore research points and give you research. And then on top of that, you also have the command module, which you can use to deploy drones from and extend your drone range. Now, at the beginning of the game, you won't even worry about people at all because you'll be mostly worried about trying to get the necessary resources so that you can eventually support life. So you'll be sending those rovers out to collect research to get you new research, sending out the command drones to try and collect resources, and then building up new infrastructure like water and electricity. And then you've got the rocket system, which is an interesting mechanic for the game and really fits the theme of it. Basically, you have a set number of rockets that you get depending on what kind of start you chose and if you buy more, and these rockets can be used to send resources back and forth between Earth and Mars. So for example, when you eventually want people, you can request them and have a rocket come from Earth with passengers, or you can request resources that you can't find very easily on Mars. Eventually, once you feel like you've got a pretty good system going up, you begin to request people. You can request your first passengers, and then you have to survive for 10 souls with them and not have anybody die or anything horrible happen, and then you can begin requesting more. Now, the game really begins to change quite a bit once you have people on the planet, because you can do things like metal extractors to get you more resources that you can't find on the planet. You can do things like research dorms to get more research, or things like machine parts and electronics that you can only get from people inside domes. This also puts quite a bit of a timer on your gameplay, because it means that you have to begin getting some of these things so that you can support your colony going forward, like machine parts, which are used in quite a lot of different things, maintenance. Now, moving on, you've got research, which is pretty expansive in this game. It's a very long tree with a ton of different technologies that can completely change the way the game is played. And it's randomized, and you've also got breakthrough technologies that massively change the way the game is played. Now, the randomization also brings in quite a bit of problems, even though it adds a lot of replayability, because it means that certain techs you just might not get for a long, long time. For the most part, the sound in Surviving Mars is pretty quiet and passable. There's a background music that'll play in the background based on the radio station you choose. You can choose things like Earth and Mars radio. There's also sounds for different machinery and pieces, but it's pretty quiet. It doesn't really make a very impactful feel. It's a lot about how the game is played, but I really want to focus on some of the negatives, because I really do think this game has a lot of shortfalls. Now, the drones are probably the most obnoxious thing about this game. For example, sometimes you'll try and get them to do something, they won't do it. There'll be resources that could be carried around, they'll just stand there, won't do that. Or if they're in the middle of doing something currently, you can't order them to do something else because they have to complete that current task before they do something else. I don't know why anybody decided to do it this way. It's idiotic. Now, another really frustrating thing is the way that the drones work in relation to the drone hubs. So basically, each drone belongs to a single drone hub, and it can't go to another one unless you manually reassign it. What this means is that if you have resources in one drone area and you want to move it to the other one, they won't move it there. So what you have to do is overlap 2 drone areas and then put a storage box in the middle so that the resources will be moved to that storage area so it can be moved then to another area's project that's being worked on. And this makes the game so frustrating to play because it feels more like you're babysitting the game than telling it to do certain things. And then you've got the maintenance system, which sounds really cool in concept, right? Every building requires certain bits of maintenance. It might get dirty or rusty or dusty, which can cause problems because the red planet is just so harsh to live on. Wind generators, for example, require machine parts, which sounds great, it's interesting. But even just being one tiny bit of production off consumption can fuck your entire colony, because suddenly you don't have the machine parts to repair your wind generators, and suddenly all your power goes down, so you don't have any fuel or any food or anything at all. And the UI is just so terrible it doesn't do a very good job at conveying production versus consumption and breakdowns by individual buildings, which can be really, really irritating because if you are having a problem, it's not very easy to tell where it is. And because the drone AI is so bad, there's times where you have the production and the capacity somewhere, but it's not being moved to another area. This is alleviated a little bit later in the game when you get things like shuttles, which can move resources from one area to another, but you get them so much later down in the tech tree that it's basically irrelevant. And then there's the fact that this game is just painfully slow. Even on the fastest game settings, it takes forever for days to go by and resources to get generated and things to get moved around. It oftentimes feels like you're more just watching the game play itself. And this goes for everything from research to production to moving colonists around to waiting for rockets to come to waiting for the initial rocket 10 day that you have to wait before you get more colonists to end. Everything just takes forever in this game. It's boring. Most city builders have a pretty nice flow where there's points where the game slows down a little bit, allowing you time to look around your city, find inefficiencies, and make changes compared to the points where you're making decisions. But this game doesn't have any of that at all. It's just slow constantly. Another big problem is the fact that you can't mix and match colony domes. So for example, you can't plant a dome that's residential and connect it with a dome that's work, and then have people go between them at all. It doesn't work. And then there's the fact that there isn't even a tutorial in this game, despite the fact that a lot of the mechanics of the game are not very intuitive at all. Now, I could go on and on about the problems with this game forever, but I really think I made my point at this point, which is that the game just isn't that fun. It's buggy, it's unfinished, it doesn't make sense. There's things like the bugs where units just don't respond to your orders, or the fact that you can't have domes connected. There's so many little oversights and just stupid mechanics and bad UI design that just don't make sense at all. And as a result, this game has to get a 5 out of 10. I really like parts of it, and I think if the game was sped up a little bit and fixed some of these problems, it wouldn't feel as bad. But as a result, right now this game just isn't that fun, and I can't recommend it to anyone who's looking for a city building survival type of game.